like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I know all the feelings that we shared are in the past. And I know your relationships are never meant to last. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. Moving on, moving on. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. Moving on, moving on.
Hi, I'm Sena. In Indonesia, less than 10% coral reefs are categorized as excellent. It is such an unfortunate number since Indonesia is an archipelago. Millions of people are counting on marine resources. My first experience in coral restoration was for my university internship. My super kind mentor, Pariyama, was the only one working in coral restoration in Nusa Dua. It was a small portion of a coral garden, but I saw hundreds of other bioidas living in it. How amazing would it be if every single coral reef in Indonesia was in a healthy state? Then I got the opportunity to become a coral cat superwoman. Such an amazing experience. What I felt when I saw them dying, it hurts my heart. Some of the corals we transplanted couldn't survive, mostly because we took corals that were already broken. They might already been stressed before we transplanted them. With the warming temperature of the world, it's not surprising if the corals are stressed. All we can do is to keep restoring them, so someday they will be resilient to thermal stress. What I felt seeing my colonies deployed more than a year ago, I saw beautiful corals growing strong. Some have new recruitment of corals, some have cool, soft corals, and more importantly, lots of various fishes are swimming around. I almost cried looking at them. What I want the world to know is the importance of coral reefs, not just for the ocean, but also for us. I also want people to realize even how tiny they might feel doing for environment, they all matter.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to our second and final part of Plenary. To kick us off, we have Professor Peter Mumby with part 2 of his talk from Monday. On Monday, we heard from Peter about the realities of restoration in the face of climate change. Today, we'll hear about the path forward and how and when to intervene on coral reefs. Friends, Peter Mumby.
Thanks very much. Is this working properly? You can hear me? I did something very dangerous. I just went to the bathroom with the microphone on. I'm pretty glad that it wasn't switched on, I hope. Before I start, I just wanted to reflect for a moment about this conference. And I'm English, and I'm told that one of the most frustrating aspects and habits of English people is that we always understate how we feel. So if something is excellent, we say, it's pretty reasonable, pretty good. And so with that in mind, when I say that the work that's been happening at this conference over the last few days is absolutely awesome, you know I mean it. It's really been fantastic to see all this work. You should all be very proud of yourselves. So I'm going to talk this morning a bit more about how to make decisions regarding restoration. And I welcome a lot of the comments that went this morning to talk about how different methods are appropriate in different environments, different countries, different scales. And that's really key. So when we talked on Monday, we sort of concluded that if we ask the question which reefs do better, even given climate change and all of the other things that are happening, not surprisingly, some of the key attributes are if they have lower risk of severity of bleaching, if they manage to avoid the worst of cyclone damage, and if there is high level of larval supply to help push that recovery. And the great thing is, we know something about all of these things. There is something predictable about these effects that can be used to build strategy, long-term strategy for designing long-term restoration and other management. So, for example, refugia from bleaching and cyclones. On the Great Barrier Reef, we know there are areas that are statistically less likely to bleach. This is due to the oceanography, and that's been shown by a number of people, including Joni Claypass, who's here. But we also know that there are refugia from cyclones, where a cluster of reefs might protect the reefs behind them from most of those damaging impacts. So you can map these areas. We know there are hotspots of bleaching pressure, where the water gets really warm because of the mixing in those areas. So especially when there's bleaching events, this is where there's very high selection pressure for the most thermally tolerant corals. And increasingly, we're getting closer and closer resolution of connectivity information on larval dispersal, whether it's on corals, crown-of-thorn starfish, reef fish, and so on. So we have all this information, and we're getting it. It's not that hard to acquire. So how might you use this? And I think, to me, the key question is, how might you zone your coastal area into these different environments and think, what are the most appropriate uses of those reefs, and how would you tailor your management interventions, including the appropriate restoration methods for those environments? And so, for example, if in this case, I'm just looking at a bit of the Great Barrier Reef, that's a representation of connectivity of larvae. But you might have some areas which we know are relatively hot. Areas that we know are actually these refugia, the cool spots. And you may be fortunate enough to have some refugia from damaging cyclones and bleaching. So if you're looking in the areas that are really hot, this is where you're expecting intense selection and the highest rates of adaptation. There's a few caveats to that. Which means that's a good place to go if you're seeking heat-adapted corals for assisted gene flow or assisted evolution. Or just moving them where they can become safe later, as Austin was saying. We also know that if you can find some of those reefs that are well connected through larval dispersal to cooler areas, then that's going to help shape long-term migration of those heat-adapted genotypes to areas where they can be valuable in future. But this is an environment that's extremely hostile for corals. And so it's very likely that if you had some outplanting experiment with a land-based nursery where you might not have very high diversity of species or diversity within a species, it might be a risky strategy to put those corals into an environment like this. There's a high risk they'll all go. So for here, you really want to try and use restoration methods that are maximizing diversity, so methods that maybe harvest larval slicks, where you can capture a range of species and quite a range of individuals, might be more useful in an area like that. And also, because this is high-intensity pressure from bleaching, you're going to expect to have lower densities of corals. And the corals that are there are going to have their fecundity threatened by the high heat stress. So these are areas where algae effects on reproduction are likely to be most intense. So that might be one of the criteria you try and focus your restoration on in these areas. If we look to the cooler places, well, we're going to expect to see higher coral population densities. That means that many of the ecosystem functions and services that rely on healthy coral populations are going to be stronger in those areas, potentially. And so you might want to have less restrictions or allow those sorts of activities in these areas because that's where they're likely to flourish. And the types of restoration you might use in a more benign environment like that, you can focus more on what's the most cost-effective method for our specific environment. It might be outplanting, where you're less worried about diversity, or other methods. And in these bleaching and cyclone refugia, these are great places for nurseries. These are great places for the sweet spots, as Austin was mentioning. They're also a great location for some of the tourism infrastructure because it's predictably good quality. So you can start managing the system spatially according to how you understand its functioning. Now, that's all based on things that we have some predictive capability to deal with. But of course, there's lots of reefs that are average. And for that, there'll be unpredictable impacts. It could be cyclones, outbreaks of starfish, disease, and so forth. And for managing those areas, it's so important, especially if you have larger reefs, to have rapid reconnaissance data. And reconnaissance data is information from a large number of locations that's collected often quite quickly. It's the opposite, in a way, of monitoring data, where you have to have a small number of locations that you measure accurately, repeatedly. And here's an example of why reconnaissance data is useful. Imagine that you have a whole bunch of reefs, and you know nothing about them, but maybe you've learned something about the connectivity. Someone's done some hydrodynamic modeling. Now, looking at these reefs, you would probably say that these two reefs are likely to be the most important because each of them are connected by larval dispersal to 5 other reefs downstream. But if you knew the state of those reefs from reconnaissance, you can go a lot further. And so, in fact, if we look at the health of those reefs in a very broad way, if you focus on this first reef, it's in a healthy state. That's great. It means it has the potential to send larvae where they could be useful. But in this case, 4 of the reefs downstream are still pretty healthy. They don't actually need those larvae. And one of the reefs has been damaged, and that will benefit from those larvae. But this second reef here, also in a healthy state, is attached to 1 healthy reef and 4 damaged reefs. So arguably, this is the reef that's most important right now because it's going to be the one that can help 4 other reefs on their journey to recovery after a major bleaching event. So this kind of information can help you make decisions that have to be quite responsive and quite dynamic as the system's changing. And when you start looking at that kind of information, I think there's an important role for citizen science. Because to do this, you don't need super accurate taxonomic resolution, and you don't need super accuracy in your data like you would want in monitoring. And so an example I'll share is the Great Reef Census, which is a project that's developed in Australia. Citizens are surveying about 300 reefs a year. That's 3 times the number of reefs that we monitor, which I should point out is a heroic effort on the monitoring side. But that's a much larger number of reefs. And then there's a combination of AI and then global citizens from many countries that help analyze that. And each year, this census runs for 3 months, and within 2 months of the end of that census, we have a revised prioritization of these key reefs across the Great Barrier Reef. And those are used, in part, to target where those reefs can be protected from crown-of-thorn starfish. So this is a practical way of using citizen science to identify priority areas to try and help that coral recovery process and prevent the loss of key locations. Okay. But then I want to talk a little bit about decision support, the sort of what do you do, where, and when. And there's a whole range of different decision support tools. But I think we can all agree that with the increasing scale of climate impacts, we have to have great prioritization, especially in reasonably large coral reef systems. You can't do everything everywhere. And we know that you can only restore relatively small areas of reef at a time. So how do you make those decisions? And I think this is where decision support tools can help put the science at people's fingertips. That will be so important. And ideally, it allows a manager or practitioner to compare the benefits of alternative approaches for that restoration intervention. And there's different ways of doing this. I think that the most compelling are going to be where there's some kind of biophysical model helping to integrate that knowledge, integrate what we know about the processes, and project into the future. And that model may be assisted with AI analysis for sure, but it ideally is based on the mechanisms of what's going on. So I'll quickly return to the model that we shared on Monday. This is an ecological simulation model for the Great Barrier Reef. What we've done with that, and it's not publicly available yet, this is part of the RAP project, is now have that model run in a web browser, which we'll be talking about later today. So, for example, you might go onto that, visualize the larval dispersal amongst reefs, as we're doing here, and design an intervention. So in this case, we're looking at a bunch of reefs, and we've highlighted some reefs there that we think are worthy of an intervention. This is a completely made-up example in 5 minutes, by the way. So don't pay too much attention. So you've identified some reefs that you think are worth some kind of restoration and management. The next thing you do is design, well, what's the scenario? Well, we're interested in this case of running from today until 2050, and we want to run this model 3 times. We can go for more to get some sense of variability. You could do a lot more if you wanted. And we want to go with the current climate change scenario. Then you're going to set some interventions. And your first intervention might be, we want to assume that the government are meeting their water quality targets for the state. So that will be the first thing. Then we're going to say, we're going to ensure that on each of those reefs, every year we're going to do crown-of-thorn starfish control. It's relatively trivial to do on a small number of reefs like that. So that's going to be part of it. But we're also going to do an intervention of restoration. In this case, what we're going to design is from today until 2040, we're going to do restoration every 5 years. We're going to restore 5% of each of those reefs on each of those 5-year periods. This is another made-up example. And we're going to outplant staghorn acroporids, plating acroporids, corymbrose acroporids, not the other species types, at these densities. And we've had this group in a university develop what they believe to be a thermally tolerant type of acropora that is equivalently 3-degree heating weeks more tolerant than the average coral out on the reef. So we're going to deploy those as part of this. This is a made-up example again. So you do that, you run the model, and it will give you some projections. So in this case, I know it's a very small graph to see, but don't worry about that. This is the projection just for the branching acropora. So this is looking at what the cover of that type of coral is over time. So the sort of purpley lines are the counterfactual, before you did the intervention, and if you didn't do the intervention. And the orange ones are the intervention, when we've added this. And if we just simplify to look at the mean trajectory, we can start seeing some information. We can see, for example, that the benefits start to occur about 7 years after we start, and the benefits run for, 15 years or so. And then we start to lose the benefits because we stopped in 2040. So in this case, we can start getting a sense of what this intervention might achieve, even though there's still bleaching events and cyclones and things happening on that reef system. And you can visualize the outcome. You might define some categories of reef state. This is something that we do in Australia. And then look at, over time, how those categories of reef state have changed or are projected to change. In this case, we might find, for example, that 7% of our very good reefs improved to an excellent category. But in fact, twice as many went the opposite direction. So, not ideal. But we can also then visualize where most of the benefits were occurring. So in this example, in the year 2040, we find that 23 reefs achieved a 2.3% increase in the cover of this acropora at the reef scale, bearing in mind we only restored 5% of those reefs. Now, I'm not going to say that's a good outcome or bad outcome. It's just what it is when this made up one I created. So to summarize, I think it's now possible to anticipate the benefits, costs, and timescales of management interventions. This is very different to those of us that may be a bit older. I mean, when I first started working on reef conservation, which was in Belize in the early 1990s, we were trying to design MPAs with no guidance from science, really. A lot of it was common sense, hoping that people would benefit. We couldn't predict who would benefit, how much they would benefit. We just did everything we could. I think a lot of people, that's how we work. But these days, we can go further. I think doing this kind of thing helps increase transparency and help set what are hopefully achievable targets for what that restoration might be able to achieve. It provides a counterfactual against which the benefits of restoration can be evaluated. And as we talk about some of the potential funding models for restoration in the longer term, this kind of information is going to be important for that. And I know people are going to say, but we don't have this kind of information for our area. Well, that's fair. But ecological models can be adapted of various complexities. They can be adapted from various regions. Our model started in the Caribbean, for example, and then it's changed. But I think one of the really important take-homes from this is we mustn't let the science be paralyze us from trying to progress this. Because if you create a scenario, in a model like this, and you run that scenario with what you know today, and the scenario comes back and says, you are not going to get any real benefit from this restoration exercise in these locations, with these outplanting densities or what have you. Well, that's information that you should pay attention to. It tells us that the science we already have is saying, I don't think this is going to work. But there'll be other locations and other strategies where it says, you know what, we think this can work. It doesn't guarantee it will work. There could still be an unauthorized bleaching event of 20-degree heating weeks like happened last year and this year. But it means that the potential exists to move forward with that. And I think that helps us avoid some of the mistakes we might otherwise make. And the biggest value is in managers and scientists partnering in developing these applications. And to me, that's one of the greatest values of the Reef Futures meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Critical information. We can't restore reefs everywhere. We can't restore our way out of this problem, but if we make smart decisions about where we restore, we'll have a much greater chance of success. And I think what Peter said there is we don't have to necessarily, the models are great tools, but you can utilize the information those models are showing and utilize them in your place, in your backyard, and look for smart places to make the reefs that you're working to restore. Next, we want to go to another panel discussion, our second of today, and our second panel discussion featuring the Coral Restoration Consortium's Advisory Board to talk about where they see restoration going in the future, from where community efforts go to where high-tech efforts go. And so once again, I'd like to welcome Joe Pollock, our Advisory Board Chair, back to the stage to introduce the panel.
How's everybody doing? We good? It's Thursday. We're getting there. Just want to start out by acknowledging what an amazing group of people we have together here. Just the presentations you all have given, the posters, the conversations for me have been immensely inspiring, and it's just so incredible to see just the quality and quantity of work that you all are doing and that you're bringing to this field. The diversity of approaches from low cost to high tech, from hyper-local to national and regional are amazingly complementary, I think. And it's just so great to see all of you tackling these challenges from so many different sides. And as I looked at all the work that you're doing, kind of the golden thread that I see weaved throughout all of that is connection. It's connections that break down traditional silos amongst different ways of doing work or different places or industries. It's respectful connections with local and indigenous communities. It's connections across disparate projects and work spanning the globe. And Reef Futures, in my mind, is really the key to establishing and nurturing these connections. And all of you in the audience are the ones that are making it happen. I asked you on Monday to give yourselves and each other a quick round of applause. I'm going to ask you to do that one more time. You all are doing amazing work, and this field would not be what it is without all of you. Can you please just give yourselves, give each other a little round of applause that is incredibly well deserved. So I talked about connections and the Coral Restoration Consortium's advisory board. Our aim is to strengthen these connections and to amplify the work that many of you are doing. From the work I've seen over the last few days, I'm incredibly excited about the future, but we'd be naive if we said there weren't significant challenges ahead. On Monday, our panel discussion was about the past. It was about how we got to this current moment. Today's conversation is about where we're going. It's looking ahead into the future, or the many different ways that could be the future of coral reef restoration. So if you all wouldn't mind, I'd love to have your help welcoming up our panelists for today. We've got Nicole Crane. We've got Duigvi Valiente. We've got Liv Williamson. And we've got Daniel Wengprasurt. We may have too many mics. Just get an extra mic. Okay, so thank you all for coming. I did have a little bit of feedback from the last panel that I was too easy on the panelists. So this time we're actually going to bring the heat. You guys might actually get some tough questions, okay? So to kick us off, would each of you mind by starting out with what you see as the future of reef restoration? Daniel?
To me, the future of reef restoration is going to be innovation-driven. It's going to be proactive and preventative. I think we're slowly going to shift towards enhancing ecosystem, so developing enhancing ecosystem solutions, and it's going to be globally coordinated. I feel that organizations like the CRC will be able to unite our efforts.
Thank you, Daniel. Liv?
To me, the future of reef restoration is proactive and adaptive, drawing on a suite or maybe a toolkit of lots of different approaches, tools and technologies and methods that have been developed all over the world, and that kind of allow us to react and deploy these different solutions when disaster strikes and we're ready to be proactive rather than reactive. A big and important part of all of those tools is not that they're concentrated in the hands of a few or in the hands of a few of those organizations that have the most resources or are able to innovate, but importantly have been made affordable and applicable in a wide range of contexts across a wide range of stakeholders.
Well, to me, the future of reef restoration is in this room, largely, and with collaborators that are not able to be here with us. I see the future as being one where we meet across disciplines, across technologies, across cultures, across knowledge systems, to find a place to meet our collective needs and desires, to live in a world where coral reefs are sustainable and functional for the needs of multiple people. And to me, that future includes an understanding of what those needs are at local levels. Many of the places many of us work, we are not of place. And that includes an understanding of the value systems of those people to ensure that we aren't bringing our value systems and imposing upon people what our needs and desires are, so to understand theirs. And I feel like we have so many technologies and so many amazing groups and people working on things. There's a huge resource pool, and we need to get that resource pool to places where we can implement across a much broader scope and scale, one community at a time, with communities, putting them in leadership roles.
To me, the future of restoration is integrative. It includes communities, and especially communities that are informed in what the best tools and methods and technology are, and also a future where restoration is just not greenwashing.
Well said. Well said. So as we look forward Do we think that coral reef restoration can make a significant impact, not just for the reefs, but for the people that rely on those reefs? Maybe Dewey, you could share your thoughts.
Well, I'm a person that comes from an indigenous community in Panama. It's a community that has 80% of the coral reef of the whole country. And even though my dream has been for more than 10 years to have a restoration project, I am aware now that if we don't tackle other issues such as water management or contamination of the upstream of the rivers or bad fishing techniques, then the restoration efforts that we might apply are not going to be successful. So definitely, when it comes to working with the communities, it is very important to make us aware of what is the whole lifestyle, the whole life cycle of the projects that are going to be conducted in our communities, and to make sure that we have all the information available to take decisions on how we want to participate in these projects.
Definitely. Nicole, do you have any thoughts on this one about whether reef restoration can make a significant impact, not just for the reefs, but for the people that rely on them?
Well, personally, I think absolutely. That's why we're all here. I think that without that hope, I think we'd all be sort of maybe in our labs trying things that we're not as excited about. However, I would say the real answer to that question lies in the communities with which many of us work. We can't make that decision alone, and I think if we try to make that decision alone, we can actually cause harm to people. So I really believe very deeply that we need to work with people to answer that exact question. I think it's so easy to teach and preach, and I think many of us have come up through systems where that's sort of our modus operandi. It's easier to tell people things than to listen to them. And I think if we intentionally listen, we can learn so much about things like connectivity, which is an expensive thing to try to understand. I've been in places where there's been long, very expensive connectivity projects, and you can ask a local person and they know exactly how things are connected. So I feel like if we share knowledge this way, we can focus on the technologies that we can bring to really achieve that.
Thank you. My next question is about novel technologies. From your opinions, what novel technologies do you think are most likely to transform reef restoration into the future? And how might they be scaled up to maximize their impact? Maybe Daniel?
Well, I've seen a lot of amazing technologies during this week, so it's hard to narrow down just a few. But I think on a higher level, I believe that cross-disciplinary technologies have a high potential for transformation. Technologies that come from medical sciences, engineering, AI, machine learning. This is because they have been heavily funded. We can tap into these resources and don't have to start from scratch. To me, innovation is about combining existing ideas in novel ways and then develop solutions for coral reefs. Now, in order to scale these technologies, we actually have to create them based on real demand. So we got to listen to the people, to the communities, to the NGOs that work on the ground, instead of being distracted by trying to publish a high-impact paper that actually limits real impact.
Thank you, Daniel. Liv,
Okay.
maybe make a big impact.
Sorry about that. I would echo a lot of what Daniel said. I think there are just tremendous ways that we can learn from other fields, in particular biomedicine and agriculture, where technologies have revolutionized how we treat diseases and feed the world. And really, fundamentally, all of those are made up of the same building blocks as our corals, cells and DNA. So we have so much to learn from those tools and borrow and bring those into things like sort of genetic rescue technologies, which can mean everything from really the sort of most fundamental basic building blocks of what makes our populations resilient, genomic sequencing and bioinformatics, all the way up to more kind of high-level interventions, things like assisted reproductive technologies or genetic engineering. But the thing that I think will really help with scale for all of these is some of the tools that we've been learning about today already, AI and modeling and prediction, to help make these tools more accessible, make them easier to use for non-experts, non-programmers, as was said earlier, and ideally put these sort of cutting-edge tools into the hands of everybody so that they can figure out how best to make them work in their context. There's plenty of reefs that, don't need the cutting edge stuff just yet. They just need to get their restoration programs underway. And then there's plenty of really degraded places that definitely need those higher level interventions and everything in between. And so by learning from each other and kind of democratizing these technologies across a more wide range of practitioners, I think we can achieve scale, not just in one technology that's everywhere, but lots of technologies that we're all sharing together.
And so I've heard, that all of this should be driven by communication, by real needs, by listening. And I'm wondering, how can we do as a field, or I guess individually, a better job of elevating local and indigenous voices in this work as we move forward? Maybe Dewey.
Definitely, I think that there is a change in the way that philanthropies, NGOs, and big international organizations are approaching communities. And I think that WCA is a good example of how we are making sure that each community and the people that are working with us in the field have free, informed, and previous consent on what we are doing, and putting people at the table where the decisions are being made. For example, I'm one of the first indigenous person, and I'm also non-binary, working for the global team as the program manager for coral reef conservation in a big organization, brings a new perspective on how we should work with the communities, because I'm from there, because I grew up in a place where we don't have proper management of the ways of people, so everything goes to the sea. And I'm aware of the difficulties when there is no rain, because we basically have our crops, and we have been having for centuries a farming technique and method that is very interrelated with nature, but that is changing because of climate change. And all these impacts most of the time are not being faced by the people that are managing these organizations in New York or in other places in the north. So it's very important that within your organizations you also give spaces for capacity building and for people like me to be in the places that the decisions are, where the decisions are being made.
I think that's kind of... Thank you, Dewey. Nicole, any thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah, good. Okay, I can. You probably imagine I have something to say about that. Thank you. I'm going to go one step further and say that there's a big gap between the development of these ideas, these technologies, and these processes, and testing them in field sites. For example, laboratories. Morea is a great example of a field site where a lot of this stuff is tested. There's a huge gap between that and getting some of this work out to places where people and reefs need it. And I think that gap is partly about elevating voices and inviting people to lead. So I'm going to use an analogy here, so excuse me for this, but food is something that brings people together, so it's an analogy that comes to my mind. We need to not be setting our tables and inviting people to eat. We need to be setting a table together and inviting ourselves to that shared table. It may be different food, it may be a different way of eating, it may be a different place where we eat. And we keep with this concept of inviting people into our spaces. And I think we need to go one step further and really try to set a table where there's more neutral ground so that we can really elevate those voices into that shared space. It isn't easy to do that, so I'm not saying this flippantly. I understand how difficult it is to do that, but I think we need to make the effort, and we need to get funders to recognize that so we can fund some of those efforts.
And just as a quick reminder, if that made anyone hungry, we're only 1 hour away from being able to hit up the buffet, so stick with us, please. So kind of on the theme of helping to make the benefits of this work more equitable, as restoration becomes more commercialized, which it may very well do, how do we ensure that profit motives don't overshadow conservation goals? Liv?
That's a great question. You know, I'm really encouraged to see a lot of commercial entities come into this space so that we can try to diversify and build our funding pool, because we all know that funding is scarce and we don't want to be competing with each other for it. But at the same time, we really, as a community, I think, need to hold those entities accountable and make sure that they're, you know, putting conservation first and science-based management first and benefits for the community first. You know, the whole point of why we're doing reef restoration, I think, for most of us, is because they're important for local communities economically, ecologically, culturally. And so if we're not making sure that every reef restoration project that we're doing, whether it's small or large, whether it's funded by a grant or, you know, a for-profit entity, needs to be returning the benefits of that to those local communities. So I think we need to make sure that we're not just accepting, oh, we've planted, you know, 10,000 corals this year, we've covered this number of hectares. Did those survive? Did they reproduce? Were they susceptible to disease? Did they make it through the heat wave? Are they returning the ecological benefit both for that ecosystem and for the people there? So I think we really need to encourage those entities to monitor and to be transparent with all of the data that they collect and all of the downstream effects of their projects. And I encourage us as a community to not only think about grants and for-profit entities, but other ways that we can diversify the funding and build this pool. So things like biodiversity credits that have been mentioned, insurance schemes, and other innovative financial tools. We need to be exploring all of those avenues to just make this pool bigger for us to have better funding.
And Daniel, you spoke about drawing from technologies from other fields that maybe don't have the best history of, you know, letting profit margins take a backseat to conservation and humanity goals. Do you have any thoughts on how to overcome this challenge?
Well, I agree with what Liv said. I do think we should commercialize. I think it's important to think about generating financially sustainable business models, and it can be a major driver to scale restoration activities. But I do think we as a community need to change the narrative first a little bit. Just because coral reefs are beautiful doesn't mean that we're not allowed to tap into this economic powerhouse that they are. I think we should think about how we can attract further funding through developing coastal protection solutions, biodiversity credits, as you mentioned. Of course, at the core, the businesses that are developed, they need to be aligned with conservation goals. So the way to do this would be to actually involve diverse stakeholders in the formation of companies. So if you're a for-profit company, have NGOs on your board, involve the local communities so that you actually generate some sort of more grassroots-driven businesses instead of having a few big players that end up exploiting our resources.
Thank you, Daniel. So this panel is about the future. So thinking about what reefs may look like, you know, many years from now. This next question is a little bit related to that. In your vision of the future, are we restoring to what reefs looked like in the past? Or should we be planning for reefs that may look very different in the future to how they've looked historically? Dewey, do you have any thoughts on that?
I hope that we get to see back the reefs that I used to see when I was 9 years old and I was swimming around my islands. I think it's going to be very difficult, but I'm very hopeful that we can restore the ecological integrity of our ecosystems. And we have to move away of just measuring how many corals or how many fragments, but what is the real impact of these restoration efforts in the ecosystems and how we're making sure that the functionalities of the ecosystems are the most important things when we talk about these projects, and how we are monitoring that at an ecosystem level and not only at a fragment level.
Yeah. Thank you, Dewey. Daniel?
Yeah, I agree. Building upon this, maybe we need to think about creating reefs that are future ready. We need to think about resilience, of course, and we need to prioritize. In some cases, you might not be able to restore this beautiful multifunctional reef. In these cases, we need to decide what we're focusing on based on the local socio-economic context. In some areas, you might create a hybrid reef aimed at coastal protection that only has a few coral species, but it fulfills a certain function and can help locally and drive the local economy. So I do think we have to think about that the future of reefs might look different.
So thinking about how different they may look, here's a little bit of a softball. So is there a point at which, in your opinion, a reef should be considered a lost cause and efforts should be focused elsewhere? If so, how might you make those kinds of tough decisions? Liv.
As a person based in Florida, I reject that concept. We have seen so much destruction, especially over the last 2 years, but really historically. And look at who is still in the room and who is still working on restoring these reefs and pivoting and adapting and being innovative with how they think about that. So I think what I would worry about in abandoning any sort of reef altogether is who's making that decision. If there's local folks there that are still tied to those resources and still have something to gain from bringing those resources back. Maybe it looks a little bit different from restoration somewhere where those reefs are still in a good state, but if there's some sort of benefit we can still get from it, and if it still has meaning, personally, I just reject the idea of abandoning that altogether. I also think we have a lot to learn from very degraded reef systems. We can really potentially trial some very novel approaches in places that are really, really degraded, because if those work there, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, potentially. And in addition, the corals that do survive in really degraded places or really disturbed places, we have so much to learn from them. The genetic diversity that they have, the alleles that they have that they've adapted to could be so important down the road for potentially injecting resilience into other populations that degrade later, or the connectivity that they offer between reefs is something to consider. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Liv. Nicole, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on this. I absolutely reject that idea as well of abandoning reefs. I also would caution all of us from making determinations on what's healthy and what isn't. I feel like we have a lot of scientific tools to make determinations. However, there's a lot of other things that go into determining whether a reef is healthy or not. We work in Ulithi Atoll, and we actually work on a reef that was really degraded. Then it switched to a complete Montipora-dominated reef, which the people didn't like because the fish don't like it either. A typhoon came through, it destroyed that reef and leveled it. It has now come back to this unbelievably Acropora-dominated diverse reef system, and none of us expected it, and we have a lot of tools we're using to monitor that reef. So that was a really interesting learning experience for all of our teams, all of us, the local as well as our Western teams. So I would caution us before we just reject and throw away reefs we think are beyond repair. And again, I'm going to say that I think we need to get a lot of other knowledge systems involved in that determination.
For the record, not proposing the lost cause concept, just stimulating some conversation here. I think we've probably got time for just one more question before we do some kind of final thoughts and statements. So how do we balance the need for global coordination and knowledge sharing with the importance, as we know, of including and elevating local and indigenous leadership in restoration efforts? Dewey, do you have any thoughts on that?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah,
please?
yeah. How do we balance the need for global coordination and knowledge sharing with, the need for local leadership?
I think that there are many events globally. We have COP, for example. We have COP for biodiversity, for climate. And those two topics are very interrelated to the work that we do both in conservation and in restoration. And in both of those events, for example, there are groups that are led by indigenous people. And I often feel that in the different events, we go and we talk about the same things, but we don't end up collaborating enough so that there is a single message and there is a clear way to communicate with the indigenous groups or the indigenous leaders. So the more we identify how we can collaborate across different topics such as biodiversity loss or climate change, and how we can identify who is working within those communities on those topics, and then we can come with the restoration field work that we are doing, we can generate a closer collaboration and more efficient and long-standing solutions.
Thank you, Dewey. So we're kind of near to the end of our time. Are there any last thoughts, ideas, insights that you all want to leave us with? Maybe we'll just kind of go down the line.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for like this amazing week. The CSE has done a great job in putting amazing talks together. I was blown away by the workshop, by the Engineering and Innovation Working Group. So it's really amazing to see. I do think, coral reef degradation is one of the biggest challenges of our time, but with that also comes one of the biggest opportunities of our time to do something good, to create sustainable businesses, to co-create potentially one of the fastest economies of our time. And I do believe in the power of technology and innovation. I do think that we can create a future where technology actually enhances nature and provides sustainable solutions for us and the environment for many generations.
Thank you, Daniel.
I second most of that, all of that. I'm really encouraged to see the switch to focusing on proactive solutions rather than reactive ones. And that doesn't mean just in the development of tools and technologies, but really being this room, creating proactive alliances and collaborations, especially across regions and across places that you think you don't have a lot in common with. I mean, again, Florida has so much to offer the world as far as what we've done wrong and what we've learned. And I really encourage, that's just one example among many, but I really encourage people to continue to keep these alliances alive with places and people that you think are doing work that's really different than yours, because you don't know what you have to learn from them. And keeping those lines of communication open will be really critical for us to be able to respond rather than react to, future crises. And I'm really encouraged by seeing people starting to weigh kind of the costs of our novel interventions against the cost of inaction or against the cost of inadequately bold action, because that's kind of what's gotten us here in the first place. So I'm hoping that going forward we can kind of flip the narrative away from being so fearful of what we might do wrong and instead think about being optimistic about what we might do right and what the future can look like that's different from today.
Thank you, Liv.
Well, I'm going to close by saying how incredibly impassioned and excited I am by all of the passion and excitement I've seen here this week. It's really amazing. I'm going to encourage all of us to keep our youth in our spotlight here and encourage more people to get into these fields, youth across the board, not just in our own academic institutions, but also in the communities with which we work. Young people are so central to everything we do. I'm also really thankful of the CRC. I think the CRC is actually doing a lot of this, bringing together community and providing a platform for interaction and discussion and coming together. I would add to something that Dewey said, I think we need more communication around bringing Indigenous peoples to these meetings, about collaborating with them in spaces, in Western spaces, as well as on the ground. So I'd say inclusivity is going to become more and more important in the work we're all trying to do.
Thanks, Nicole.
And I will just add that from the indigenous perspective, we have been always open to collaborate, and our own cultures are mostly communal and we share. So don't be afraid to knock on the door and look at us as partners and as individuals that can become leaders within your organizations.
It's a great note to end on. Yeah, help me thank this incredible panel for sharing with us today.
And thank you,
right.
Joe.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to also thank the advisory board members who are on this panel and those who are in the audience and couldn't make it. I want to thank Tom, Tali, the organizers, the CRC. I have to acknowledge Virginia Weiss, the amazing co-lead of the advisory board. None of this would be possible without her. And then finish by thanking all of you for your time, your attention, your work, your sharing. Again, you all make this happen, and I personally am incredibly grateful to be a part of this community and here with all of you all.
Thank you. That was spectacular. Thank you, guys. Really amazing messaging. And as we talk about the topic of messaging, we want to transition now to something new that we did this year for Reef Futures. And that was not just invite scientific content, not just invite storytelling, but invite people to submit films to us to help tell how they tell their story in their community, how they tell their story to other people. And so on Tuesday, we had the opportunity to have our first Reefs to Reels film festival that was put on by the amazing Alice Grainger with the Coral Restoration Foundation. Alice is the Senior Director of Engagement, but she is also one of the core players behind Reef Futures behind the scenes. She's somebody you can always count on and somebody who's worked so hard tirelessly to put this event on. Thank you, Alice.
Gracias.
Tom. Thank you so much, Tom, for that incredible introduction. Hello, everybody. Wow, what an extraordinary room. Storytelling is one of the oldest and most universal human practices. Across cultures and throughout history, from ancient firesides to contemporary oral traditions, stories have always been how we pass down wisdom and preserve cultural heritage. But storytelling isn't just about information. It's about creating meaning, shared identities, and a sense of belonging. Stories connect us to each other, to our past, and to the world that we live in. For eons, stories have helped us to make sense of the world, demystify natural phenomena, and celebrate the profound relationship between humans and nature. In conservation, storytelling is essential. It humanizes the challenges that we face, inspires collective action, and cultivates hope. When we tell our stories about coral reefs, we're not only preserving the history of these ecosystems, but we're also building a narrative for their future. Coral reefs, as we know, are vital planetary life support systems, and they're also the first victims of the climate crisis. Saving these ecosystems requires that we build bridges between these spectacular underwater wonderlands and people on land who may never experience them firsthand. Through storytelling, we can touch people at their deepest and most primal levels by reaching into hearts and minds, sparking emotional connection. We help people care about these ecosystems and the communities whose lives are intertwined with them. Because ecosystem restoration isn't just about ecosystems, as we have heard loud and clear this week. It's about humanity. And so impactful storytelling puts faces and voices to the work. It reminds us that coral reefs are not just underwater wonders. They are lifelines for over 1 billion people. The most effective stories are as much about the people as they are about the reefs, the people doing the work and the ones whose futures directly depend on them. On Tuesday, we heard from 3 brilliant minds in the field of storytelling. Bodhi Patil, CRC Advisory Board member, founder of Inner Light, and social media influencer, reminded us of the incredible untapped power of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. He stressed that to tell compelling stories, we don't need fancy equipment. You just need the phone in your pocket and the courage to be your perfectly imperfect self. Your authenticity is what resonates the most. Benji Jones, environmental correspondent with Vox, shared invaluable insights into how to get your stories picked up by the mainstream press. He spoke about the importance of connecting your piece of the work to the broader conversation, whether it's climate change, resource exploitation, or human rights, and how anger and injustice can be just as powerful as hope in motivating action. Benji also stressed the importance of visual imagery. Stills and videos, even if they've been shot on your phone, are critical for making your story compelling and shareable. And then Jason Spingenkopf, award-winning producer behind Our Oceans, Chasing Coral, and My Octopus Teacher, reminded us of the importance of awe and the wonder in the small. When you've been staring down a microscope for 17 days in a row or cleaning another coral tree, you might think that your work is mundane. But to the public, it is heroic. And this awe inspires action in a way that numbers and statistics simply can't. Awe is the spark that turns hesitation into hope and interest into investment. The collective wisdom
Corals nasce dalla passione che la popolazione ha per il calcio, unita all'esigenza di creare un nuovo network di guardiani delle scogliere coralline.
È un progetto unico nel suo genere perché combina per la prima volta l'utilizzo del calcio come leva verso una sensibilizzazione delle nuove generazioni ai cambiamenti climatici.
Le nostre aspettative sono lo sviluppo della personalità dei bambini, la collaborazione, l'amicizia, il rispetto, l'equità di genere, l'apprendimento dei valori.
Quindi questa esperienza è davvero unica, non avevamo mai fatto una cosa del genere.
Everyone loves sports and everyone plays sports and has to be a healthy citizen.
It's a kickstart for what we can do as a community, as social participants, as individuals.
It gives so much information about the world around us. We are living in small islands in middle of the ocean, so we can try to protect it.
Aquatic life from coral reefs to fish in the islands is suffering.
The situation is critical.
Biggest bleaching event ever.
Almost all of the species have bleached.
There has never been a time in history where coral reef needed more help. Coral reef are the rainforest of the sea, which produces more than half of the oxygen we breathe. But right now, not enough people care. And that's why we started our movement, and it needs to be global. This is Coral Gardeners Thailand.
ประเทศไทยเป็นศูนย์กลางของเอเชียค่ะเราอาศัยอยู่กับทะเลมาเป็นเวลานานหลายศตวรรษแต่ถึงตอนนี้ค่ะทะเลของเราเนี่ยกลับไม่สดใสเหมือนเดิมแล้วมันให้อาหารความคุ้มครองและความเป็นอยู่แก่ผู้คนของเรา
But everything is not bright. A long time ago, dynamite fishing destroyed much of the reef and marine biodiversity. It's time to rewrite the story of our ocean, and that's why we're here.
เรากำลังชวนชาวประมงและคนในชุมชนให้กลายเป็นชาวสวนปะการัง
And with our CG labs, we are giving them the most advanced tools to create a real impact.
We already have 2 fully operational sites on the island of Comac and Cocoud.
แต่นั่นเป็นเพียงแค่การเริ่มต้นของ
เพื่อเป็นตัวอย่างของความร่วมมือจากหน่วยงานของรัฐเรากำลังพัฒนาด้านการฟื้นฟูแนวปะการัง
Working with new coral species, new methods, and learning about new environments to expand in Asia and all around the world.
เราเจออุปสรรคอีกมากมายแต่มันก็ได้เริ่มการเปลี่ยนแปลงชีวิตของเราไปแล้ว
Okay, moving on from those very inspirational videos to a very inspirational speaker and organization. Our next speaker is from the Coral Restoration Foundation. But before I introduce her, I wanted to highlight that in addition to being one of our key sponsors for Reef Futures, that the Coral Restoration Foundation acts as the CRC's secretariat and has supported the CRC in numerous ways since its beginning. CRF's commitment to knowledge sharing and fostering growth within this community is embodied by their CEO and CRC chair, Dr. Scott Winters. The organization's dedication to coral reef restoration is evident in every one of their staff members. One of those special staff members is our next speaker, Jessica Levy. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Jess for several years, and she has become a true leader of the international coral restoration community. Jess is CRF's Director of Restoration Strategy, focused on scalable restoration implementation, developing international trainings, and capacity building opportunities for others in the coral restoration space. Please join me with a huge welcome to Jessica Levy.
Thank you. Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. I really hope everyone has enjoyed their week as much as I have so far. I know that many of you in this room are already familiar with Coral Restoration Foundation, so I promise this is not a chat about the coral tree. I'm not even really here to talk about our work in Florida exactly. But my goal today is really to talk about CRF's approach to restoration, how we have defined its meaning, its value, and its potential as a practice. Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize those weren't up. There we go. So CRF's program focuses on scalable restoration, ensuring species and genetic diversity, promoting collaborations, and supporting research that in turn informs our methods. We also invest heavily in education, outreach, and community involvement to ensure better ocean stewardship and that our work has a future. And while we are headquartered in Key Largo, Florida, we now operate around the world. We work collaboratively across disciplines, bolstering our practice at home, while also working to support restoration efforts internationally. And by sharing experiences and working together, we believe that we can expand the impact of restoration around the world. But understanding the impact of our work requires defining why we do what we do and how. So the next question is really, what do I mean by impact? Is it this? Is it a great photo of a really nice restoration site? It might be. But I have to ask this question. If this is our goal, and then all those corals die, what was the impact of restoration? At CRF, we have built our program over a number of years to anticipate this kind of risk. It's the fact that risk management strategy is something that is at the heart of our program and at the core of what we do. So putting corals on the reef is just one element to our programming. By aligning all of our efforts with this expectation of large-scale disturbance events, we are prepared to both respond in the field and tackle some really heavy-hitting questions. As we're all aware, last year the Florida Keys became ground zero for the 4th global coral bleaching event. And while Florida was hit first, very few of us were spared, and many of us continue to feel the effects of this today. And even though CRF spent almost 2 decades building a program to manage for risk, there's no sugarcoating the fact that we lost most of the corals that we returned on the reef since 2007. And when something that extreme happens, we have zero control over it. And we take this massive hit not only operationally, but also emotionally. And so it begs the natural question, what the heck was the point? This is a question that we're all aware that critics raise of us as an organization, raise of us as a field of practice. And if we're honest, I know every single one of us has asked this of ourselves at some point or another. Historically, value has been placed on what I just describe as the end product, basically. And so success has only been framed as essentially grow the coral, plant the coral. And how you get from A to Z, just a fancy way to get to that end result. But what we are doing, and I mean all of us in this room now, what we are doing has the potential to have an impact that is far above and beyond just coral survivorship. The fact is, the process of restoration is equally as valuable as the product itself. I'm going to highlight 3 ways that CRF is working already to bring this immense value to the field beyond that of the coral survivorship. The first 2 I know are going to be pretty obvious. The last one is something that I'm hopeful will kind of challenge the way that you think about restoration. So first, in a rapidly changing world, preventing extinction is paramount. This means that protecting both species and genetic diversity is essential, and I'd argue that this is as valuable as placing a coral on the reef. And in some cases, this may become what restoration actually is. At CRF, we've been working to bank corals, both in situ and ex situ facilities or settings, ensuring redundancy by replicating genotypes across nurseries and across restoration sites. We've also worked to develop an open registry for tracking coral genotypes, and we continue to invest in collaborations around coral spawning and cryopreservation. We're also supporting assisted gene flow efforts where that's possible, recognizing it's an incredibly complicated regulatory system out there. But it's really important to always remember that when we're trying to keep pace with a very rapidly changing environment, we need more than R&D. We need more minds on the job. Scaling up, it not only requires the advancements in tech that we're seeing and being highlighted at this conference, but it also requires scaling out, which means investing in people, education, and professionalizing this field. At CRF, we are involving systems like our intern program to lead to real career opportunities and employment opportunities. And that impact is evident if you just look around this room. Many of you have either worked at CRF or you actually have hired someone who has. There are actually over 50 individuals here with us that are either former or current CRF interns and staff. I just want to take a moment to say thank you, because you have been our people in this arena, and you have dedicated your fields and your careers to this, and I just want to congratulate you in your own journey. But of course, this is more than just being hireable and creating hireability. It's about laying the foundation to support the next generation of practitioners and reef scientists and ensuring they are supported as they grow. Our restoration program is also now hosting even more in-person international exchanges and capacity building opportunities, which is soon going to be complemented and enhanced by a virtual learning ecosystem. But the most critical hidden benefit of restoration is in the process itself. The impact of how we do what we do matters. An example of this does come from the Florida Keys, where we have been conducting an in-depth economic modeling effort, and we've found that coral restoration delivers an average economic multiplier of 1.4 to 1.6. That means that for every dollar that comes into CRF, $1.40 to $1.60 is then returned into the local Keys economy. That is a higher average multiplier than a lot of the other key industries that exist in Monroe County. And this hopefully highlights the potential for restoration to be an economic driver in its own right. But that impact is based on how we as a company have chosen to spend our money. Whether in Florida or abroad, we choose to hire local contractors, charter local companies, and we're working to provide intern stipends and employ local staff, people that live and work in the community that they are conducting restoration. I know we all love a good volunteer program, but when you pay people for their work, you're actually helping support an entire community in a very holistic way. This understanding of the social economic impact of restoration has significantly shaped how CRF is operating and how we think about restoration success. A really, really important side note to throw in here is as we think about our impact and the metrics that we use to evaluate it, we must remember that restoration success is always location dependent and culture specific. While universal concepts can guide us, what constitutes success in one place might not apply equally or exactly the same in other locations. So we think that the purpose, process, and the way that we define the success of this work should be defined by local people, by local values, and the specific importance of reefs to the communities that they serve. So as I wrap up, I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Our science can tell us what the world is, but it cannot tell us what it ought to be. That's on us to figure out. I'm sure that everyone in this room can agree that a world with corals is better than one without. And although our approaches may differ, we all share that common belief. But at CRF, we think that coral restoration can and should be much more than about marine life. We believe that restoration is mostly about supporting the communities that rely on these ecosystems and not just the corals themselves. And that when we embrace this broader impact of our work, we are able to create these ripples that extend beyond the reef. Thank you, guys. Stop going. All right, now I gotta put my CRC hat back on. So I get the privilege of introducing you all to your final keynote speaker of the program, who is Rose Huizenga. She is someone who measures success not just by the number of reefs restored, but by the lives transformed. And I've had the pleasure of working with Rose and her team in a very, very minor capacity for the past 5 years. But this is actually the first time her and I have gotten to meet in person, and I'm totally fangirling over this week. It just reminds me of the power that Reef Futures has to bring people in our community together from around the world. Rose is driven by a deep passion for initiatives that empower individuals to create meaningful impacts. A proud mother of 2 girls, like many of us, she wears many, many hats. That of the conservationist, the writer, the dive instructor, boutique hotel owner, and co-founder of Gilead's first international school. Her latest endeavor, Coral Catch, is an award-winning coral restoration scholarship program that equips local Indonesian women with the tools and knowledge to make a significant impact both on land and in the water. Her dedication to this cause has not gone unnoticed. For example, in this last year alone, Rose was honored with both the prestigious Sea Hero of the Year Award and the Blue Water Heroes Award recognizing her for her visionary leadership in ocean conservation and her efforts to empower women. So please extend a warm welcome to Rose as she joins us on the stage.
That's a lot of people. Okay.
Batch 8, huh? It's already done. First of all, I think I personally wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to be assistant manager. You have no idea how much growth that I've taken from all this experience. And okay, I wrote it down so I don't want to forget what I want to say. First of all, I wanted to start by saying thank you for all your support in turning my dreams into reality. Growing up on this island, I often heard that the ocean was off limits for girls like me. For years, I let those beliefs shape my world. But then I heard about coral catch. And everything changed. And you knew it. Suddenly, I realized I could break those stereotypes and change how my community view women. Thanks to you. I could become a coral cat superwoman and like what we always talk about and reach for the stars. Scholarship? Oh, you know how chaotic it is. We sort of just floating up or down in the bottom. When I started my scholarship for the first time in my life, I met girls who had the same dreams and goals as I did, who has the same problem as well, floating in the bottom. Together, we form a strong friendship, helping each other as we face the challenges of being the first in our families to follow this path. I noticed little ships happening all around me. It became normal to see girls helping load the boats with tanks and gear. And after our dives, I would see young girls watching us with a big, curious eyes. I truly hope that when they see me, they think, hey, that could be me one day. Seeing this change, even in just a few girls, fills me with so much hope. It shows that the work we're doing is not just helping reefs, but also inspiring the new dreams and possibilities. You got this. We got this together. Now that the program has come to an end, I can confidently say it has transformed my life. It's truly transformed my life. I'm more driven than ever to continue this work, not just in marine conservation, but also in the lives of those in my community. Thank you again, Rose, for believing in me, for not saying my dream is too impossible to achieve. I look up for you because you throw everything to make. You got that crazy idea and you make it happen. Thank you. Let's keep changing the world together. Oh, Rose. Thank you.
The name of this awesome girl is Dania, and she's one of the 32 superwomen who are graduated from our award-winning scholarship program. But before I tell you all about Coral Catch, let me share a little bit about my personal journey with you. Oh. So when I was growing up, I had a dream that didn't seem to fit into one box. I wanted to follow all of my passions, build different businesses, become a mother, and be a citizen of the world. But there was not really a word for what I wanted, and there was no role models that could show me how to live this life. Because my parents, they had their own recipe for happiness. Get yourself a university degree, find yourself a steady job, and look for a nice guy. So I followed this path, at least for a while. And then I started traveling, and a whole new world opened up to me. For the first time in my life, I met people who had the same passion as me. And when I stepped foot on a tiny island in Indonesia around 10 years ago, it finally felt like coming home. And I never left. I met the love of my life on Gilier, and in 2015, we had the opportunity to buy a bit of a rundown boutique hotel called Villa Nanka. I immediately knew that this was a great opportunity for me to build a business and make a difference at the same time. So together with a friend, we designed a holiday program for people who want to learn more about marine science. And in this program, we teach them how they can assist with collecting data and be citizen scientists, and we called it Gili Shark Conservation. And with the funds of these packages, we hired the first marine biologist, and we started studying the sharks in the Gili Matra Marine Reserve. As our research center started to grow, I was feeling very proud. But to be honest with you, I was also getting slightly nervous. Because could I really lead a team of scientists if I wasn't a scientist myself? And would my love for the ocean and my commitment to conservation be enough to get the respect? If there's one thing that I learned over the last years, is that no one really cares how much you know until they know how much you care. When you lead with genuine care for your passion and your team, the respect will follow. People will be inspired by your passion and your willingness to always go the extra mile. They might even invite you to come to Mexico and share your story on a stage. Thanks, Tom. So this could be the end of my story. I was now a citizen of the world. I built different businesses. I was making an impact. And my beautiful daughter, Charlie, she chose me to be her mom. And for a while, it felt like a happy ending. But then COVID happened and everything changed. Because this business model that I built with my boutique hotel and holiday programs, funding my research and my conservation work, it fell apart. And I was always proud that I never had to ask for any donations or apply for any grants. But now I had to find a new way to keep things going. Just 5 days after my second daughter, Lucy Jane, was born, I got an invitation to apply for a grant from the United Nations for coral restoration work. As you can see, they call it small grant program, but I don't know about you, I think $80,000 is quite a lot of money. Looking at the application, I thought, what chance do I have? We are now 1 year in lockdown. I had no research team, I had no data, I had no resources. And I hadn't been diving for almost 1 year because I was busy growing a little girl in my belly. And to make it even worse, I wasn't even sure if our structures were still there. And then there was another thing, the competition. Because it seemed that the whole world was doing coral restoration these days. and on a much larger scale than us. During the long, sometimes quite lonely nights of breastfeeding, my mind often wandered back to that application. And I thought, what if I would do something that no one had ever done before? And one night, I just had this aha moment, and I woke up my husband, and I said, you know what? What about we set up the first complete local female coral restoration team in Indonesia? I already checked. It's never been done before, and I think it's going to be great. He blinked at me and said, I love you. You're insane. That's never going to work. And he went back to sleep. But the next day, when I woke up, I still had butterflies in my belly just thinking about this idea. Because by this time, I've been diving all over Indonesia and I never had a female dive guide. And whenever I visited another project, there were only guys working there. So I started talking with my friends. And they all thought it was crazy too. Where are you going to find these girls? Are they be able to carry the tanks? Their families will never allow them to be away from home. And Rose, do you realize you live in the biggest Muslim country in the world and you cannot go diving with a hijab? The list went on and on and on. But lucky, I'm a stubborn optimist and I did it anyway, with quite good success. So welcome to Coral Catch. This is a place where we turn dreams of working in conservation into reality through empowerment and hands-on experience. Our program is designed for local girls who are eager to make an impact and is built around 5 pillars. The first one is field experience. Most of our superwomen, they are fresh graduates with little dive and field experience. That's why I make sure they spend a lot of time on the water. They do around 55 scientific dives using more than 10 different research methods. We certify them as PADI scientific divers along with several other conservation diver courses. We teach them how to design and build and deploy their own structures, but I think even more importantly, we teach them how to take care of them and monitor them long after deployment. Joining them on their last dive is the best part. The hard work has paid off. They are now giving me a proper dive briefing, and they are arguing who's going to lead the dive. And before we jump off the boat, they tell me, Ibu Rose, don't forget to close the top clip of your BCD, the one that I actually always forget on purpose. It's such a change with that first week. Like Dania was already saying in the video, when some of them were still popping up to the surface. The second pillar is knowledge. As most of us know here, a lot of conservation projects, they don't have much money. And you need to be able to wear them more in one hat. So besides teaching them how to set up and monitor their own coral restoration projects, we teach them a lot more. Digital marketing, community engagement, how to raise funds, how to speak in public, and of course, how to reach for the stars. Coral Catch is proud to have more than 40 ambassadors, amazing women like Jessica, who are sharing their knowledge, their passion, and their experience through online masterclasses. Having this support network is incredibly important for their journey, and it also inspires them to pay it forward. which is the next pillar. I love the pay it forward principle, and I think it plays a very important role in protecting our oceans. From the beginning, I tell our superwoman, you got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so now it's your turn to inspire those around you. And how do they do that? They visit the local schools, and they teach the children how to take care of their island and their ocean. They organize weekly beach cleanups. They share their journey online and offline. But the thing I love the most is that they teach other women how to swim. Because after living in Indonesia for quite some time, I realized that most of my local friends don't know how to swim, which is kind of strange, right? If you realize that most of them live in coastal communities. And also, this is when something really clicked. There was no point of teaching me someone to take care of the ocean if it scares the shit out of them. So now our superwomen are giving weekly swimming classes to the local women of the Gili Islands. And once they feel confident enough, we take them snorkeling and we show them these amazing reefs which have been in their backyard their whole life. But there's more. At Coral Catch, it's about more than just learning skills or getting more experience. We created a safe space for women where they can learn, connect, and grow together. And from my experience, when women feel that they truly belong somewhere, they are more likely to step forward and stay there. I think everyone in this room knows how powerful a strong support system can be. Someone that you can call when you have a question. A cheerleader in your corner. Someone who's holding your hand when you are scared. It's these things that are making all the difference. Our Coral Catch Superwomen are surrounded by a very powerful network of ambassadors, partners, sponsors, and of course the other superwomen, which means they never have to feel alone in their journey. They are backed by a community that believes in them. The last pillar is empowerment, which I think is even the most important one, because by the time they finish the program, they truly feel that they can be leaders. But how do we empower them? It's a hard question, because it's not just one little thing that we do, it's the countless little things that we do throughout the program. And it starts with calling them superwoman, reminding them day in and day out that they can do this. We give them journals, and we teach them how to set goals and reflect on them. We organize women's circles where they can share their dreams and their fears and ask questions. Talking about emotions is not very common in Indonesia. So it's amazing to see when they are finally opening up. And this is also where you can see the sisterhood between them forming. A great example is something that happened just before I left, and one of the superwomen, she came to me and she said, Ibu Rose, I want to become a scientific dive guide, but then after I become a mother, I need to become a consultant. Can you teach me how to become a consultant? And instead of answering her question, I asked her, why do you think you cannot go diving anymore after you became a mother? She hesitated, but then said to me, because my husband will never allow me to go back to the ocean. Something which made me very emotional to hear, but at the same time it also made me smile. And I said to her, darling, I don't have to teach you how to become a consultant. I just need to teach you how to find a better husband. Sometimes I get this question, why do I only focus on women? And for me, the answer is actually pretty simple. I've been living in Indonesia for the last 10 years, and I've seen that women in coastal communities, they don't get a lot of opportunities to become leaders. But I've also seen that when I empower them, it's uplifting a whole community. And also in Indonesia, and maybe in other places in the world as well, it's the women who are staying at home and taking care of the kids. Which means if I invest in their education, I'm inspiring the next generation too. And then last but not least, I think we all know that this field for a long time was dominated by men, especially at the highest rankings. By focusing on women, we can change that, and we can start opening up equal opportunities for everyone. And just to set the record straight, for me it's not about excluding men. It's about raising the voices of women. So how do I measure success? I'm a kind of learning by doing kind of girl. So when I started my coral restoration project in 2019, I looked how others were running theirs. And I saw that often the success was measured by numbers. How many corals did you plant? And how many square meters of reef did you restore? But when I was asking the people in my network how to make these calculations, it was quite surprisingly that I was getting different answers. And then there was another thing that worried me. Because what if I applied for a grant application and then something would happen which was beyond my control, like a bleaching event or someone dropping an anchor on my nursery? Did I have to pay back all the money? At first I went along with the usual approach, but after training 3 batches of superwomen, it suddenly clicked. My success was not measured by the amount of corals that I planted, but the transforming the life of the girls that you see here on the screen. These women were learning and growing and returning back to their communities as leaders. So where are we now? 32 women have graduated from our scholarship program, and they are all now working in marine conservation or continued their studies in marine science. 4 of them even got a scholarship to study abroad. But it's my mission to empower 100 women in the next 5 years to have this career. So I still have some work to do. But with every batch that is graduating, I'm one step closer to my ultimate dream. Building a strong network of 100 female leaders protecting the coral reefs of Indonesia. Looking back at that young girl who couldn't find anyone with the same dreams like her, she finally found her path. And now I get to watch as other young women step forward into leadership roles and start inspiring the world around them. Change doesn't come from having all the answers. It's coming from a commitment to a vision and the courage to jump. And maybe you know by now that dreaming big is what I love to do. So what's going to be next? In 2025, I want to organize the first Coral Cats Conference and share my blueprint how to boost women in marine science and help more women in Southeast Asia to work in this field. I also want to set up Coral Catch Malaysia, because the beauty of this program is that you can easily copy it. The easiest way to scale it is to work together with an existing research or conservation project. And the success, I think, truly depends on just 2 factors: selecting the right superwoman and pairing them with mentors who are genuinely committed in guiding their journey. Because I truly believe when we create spaces for women to lead, we don't just transform conservation, we change whole communities. And we're going to build a future where everyone is part of the solution. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, thank you so much, Rose. That was absolutely incredible, inspiring, and even I cried this time. There were two things that really got me from that talk, and one is the learning how to swim, because I came into this field from the barren depths of the bottom of a pool, because I was obsessed with swimming for my entire childhood and was a competitive swimmer for my whole life. And it wasn't until I dove accidentally in the Red Sea and saw what was happening underneath the waves when I first saw a coral reef and had to quickly get out of the water because nobody warned me. Nobody warned me about the colors, the vibrancy, or anything like that. And I almost passed out from how thrilling and how psychedelic it looked. This was a reef in the 90s. So I'm just going to take a few minutes today and give you guys my anecdotes from the past 4 days and kind of explain to you where the CRC is going. So first of all, I just want to kind of show you what I heard in passing in the hall. I'm going to give you 6 quotes that I heard. No, don't use those kinds of zip ties. You should use these kinds of zip ties. Come, talk to me after my presentation. Another one. I met someone from across the Caribbean at the last Reef Futures, and they said they had some awesome corals. And now we have hybridized corals about to go into the water in my town. A third one. My new friend from Belize is teaching me how to help tourism operators do reef restoration in Kenya. At the last Reef Futures, I heard about Cordap, and now I have one of their grants to do my research using ornamental coral trade in Indonesia to fund local restoration. I watched a whole species blink off my island this year in Curacao. This conference feels like a group hug. There are 300 coral restoration projects in Indonesia. I wish all of my colleagues could be here to learn with me. So those were some of my favorite quotes that I heard. And I just want to echo a couple of the points that Rose made. This field, I had written this field was dominated by scientists for a very long time, but it's also true that it was dominated by male scientists. And in the Reefs to Reels section, Bodhi used the phrase coral toxic masculinity, which was a new one. And I really feel like we are in a new era here where we listen to indigenous voices, listen to women, train women to be superheroes, and I just hope that that continues. Because of the urgency of this crisis, this coral crisis, and because of this community of practice that we have created here, there is a palpable feeling, I hope you will agree with me, that this field really has changed over the past 3 Reef Futures, over the past 6 years. And the scale of projects is increasing as well. I mean, many of you were probably in the Innovation Showcase yesterday. It felt like a souk in Cairo. Coral settlement plates, free for you. Light activated anti-fouling spray, only $10. Try my zip ties, they're made out of algae. The room was buzzing and sweaty. Look, like Jess said in her talk, it might be utterly insane to do what we're doing. We're trying to restore reefs when the world is approaching 3 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100. The loudest signals we get as a community are biodiversity doesn't matter and nature doesn't matter. So what are we actually doing here? Life on Earth evolved 4 billion years ago. The first animals came on board 500 million years ago. Those were corals and their friends, jellyfish, comb jellies, and anemones. So what are we trying to restore? Are we trying to restore those corals from 500 million years ago? The corals that arrived when humans first came aboard 300,000 years ago? And why? Why are we trying to restore them? For all the critters that want to live there? Because we feel guilty? Because ultimately we are destroying them right now? I don't think that there's one answer to that question. I think there's as many answers to that question as there are people in the room. And so I'm going to tell you what drives me. Mostly it's efficiency. I got into coral reef ecology because I care about nature and I love the sea, but really I love swimming. The sea is just a place you can do that. And so if you want to save the most nature per minute effort, you work on a coral reef. That's pretty simple. And now that we know a bunch about coral reefs, and we know how to restore them, and because we know there will not be one technological solution, we saw so many technological solutions this week, but for an ecosystem that has been evolving for 500 million years, there is just no way that one thing is going to save these ecosystems. It's going to be a lot of work, and a lot of work by a lot of people. The second part about that efficiency is that there are people all over the world doing this work, and so we have to support those people if we want the corals to live in those places. And the most efficient way to do that is what we've been doing here, talking to each other, communicating, etc. And so I just want to end with an honor for all of you guys that it does take a lot of faith to keep working on this ecosystem that is pretty close to collapse. The losses are piling up. No one in this room is under any illusion about what we are doing. We are not restoring corals to pristine seas. We are really helping corals stick it out for the next few decades and hoping for the best. And we used to call Reef Futures a conference of hope. And today, after this week of seeing all this activity, I think we can safely call it a conference of action. At the CRC, we spend 103 weeks between Reef Futures trying to capitalize on some of this action and make it go further. We are a skeleton crew operating on a shoestring, but we are poised, and our vision is to create a CRC in each one of 6 reef-rich, low-income regions of the world, because this vibe cannot wait to happen every 2 years. This information needs to be transferred more and more readily, person to person. I think we all can feel that energy here. So if you caught that vibe, join us in the CRC. Join a working group, a regional group, suggest a webinar to translate your science to the broader community. Partner with us on Storytelling Hub or building a regional group. We do not have all the answers. We would like to build this community together with you. Thank you.
All I can say is wow. We talked about awing before, and I am beyond awed. What an amazing week we have had. The week is not over. We are still in the middle of it. We still have so much amazing content. We have such amazing optimism in this room. We, of course, have to acknowledge the reality of where we're at, but I am absolutely confident that we can shift the curve. We can be that base. We can be that wedge. We can make it happen. Thank you to the Reef Futures community. Thank you to our amazing plenary speakers. Thank you to all the speakers that are still to come. Thank you.